Good afternoon, everybody. How are you doing?
Blog Talk Radio.
One of the saddest topics I think we could possibly ever address is the death of a child and how parents have to endure the subsequent experiences they have at the recognition that their child is never going to return. And to be quite honest with you, between the experience of a child dying and the years that follow to recover from such, and recovery is actually not an accurate word, and the experience of always wishing that your child would come back, would resurrect, would be able to enter into the room, would come back and say, hi, Mom, or give you a hug, or all the memories, or all the hopes that an individual has about being able to passage through the anniversary experiences that one anticipates. For example, much of the country in the United States has gone through some sort of graduation with a child, whether it's a cousin, a nephew, a niece, a daughter, a son, a brother, a sister. Someone likely has graduated that's fairly close to you, and graduating from whatever school, elementary, middle school, high school, college. And so as a consequence, that becomes an anniversary time. And I decided to do this show very specifically because a friend of mine many, many years ago had their child returning from graduate night out in Disneyland, since we live in the Los Angeles area, and they spent the whole night out having a fantastic time with their peers, just so excited about having gotten through those 4 grueling years of high school and application to college and the future lying ahead. And the child was driving home, the son was driving home, and fell asleep at the steering wheel and crashed the car and died. And my friends have had to deal with that in the subsequent decades, that they've lost their son. They will not see their son's children, their son's wedding, their son's graduation from college. They just do not have that individual in their lives. And it's huge. It's a huge, huge, depressing bereavement process that parents have to go through when they have lost their children. Now, I can't talk about the parents that I've worked with who have had to undergo such horrible, awful strain because of privacy and confidentiality. I would not break what people say to me. So I'm not going to be speaking about any of that. I'm only going to be speaking about people outside my private practice, as well as what the research has to offer. And take a look at this. Within this year, 12,000 children will be diagnosed with cancer, and many of them will die. At least 25% of them will die. 7.6 million children before the age of 5 will die this year. And much of that, it's said that 75% of that's preventable. And of course, that's throughout the whole entire planet. 75% of them are preventable because it's related to illnesses or to some living condition that they just don't have the money to be able to keep their child alive. Those parents will have bereavement. How many children die in car accidents after they get their license or when their friends are driving them? And that, of course, is one reason why we have so many changes in our driver's license laws these days. And parents will have to endure the death of their child due to car accidents, due to drinking, drugs, due to natural causes, earthquakes, storms, disasters that we've been seeing all over the planet within the last few weeks have taken children's lives and left the parents to mourn as a consequence. And then, of course, since I work so much with soldiers and soldiers' families, how many soldiers have died so that their parents have to endure the loss of their child, and only for what reason? For some cause, national cause, but really, is that a good enough reason? Is there ever a good enough reason to lose a child? To lose a child to an accident, illness, a natural disaster, suicide, or war? I'm not sure there's ever a good enough reason for a child to outlive their parent to outlive their child. In some respects, it seems actually quite unnatural to think that a child would die before a parent. And yet, it happens in many, many cases. So the statistics are extremely high that a parent will lose a child, whether before the child's even born, stillbirth, or a breach of the birth process that causes complications, or in vitro, where there is a loss of the child before the child is even born. But then how about those many parents that have to go through it when their child is still young, still very dependent on them? There are lots of phases that parents go through in a desperate process of trying to survive the loss of a child and move on. The first of which is, of course, the denial that it's actually happened, and they do continue to feel like the child should just walk in the door. That's some awful, horrible nightmare that they hope to wake up from. And then every day, the pain, every night, the pain of their life. And this is not a horrible nightmare. It is a daymare. It is a life disaster that their child has died. Secondly, parents also have to overcome feeling not only grief-stricken but guilty. We live our lives as good parents, taking care of our child, making sure that our children are safe and their well-being is taken care of in that regard. And then when their child is dead, there's that same feeling of, oh my gosh, it was my responsibility. And in some cases, it might be. And that is the worst type of guilt possible. But in other cases, even when the parent has no control over the natural disaster or an illness or an accident or a child that decides to go and become a soldier and dies in battle, even when the parent has no control over it, you're still, if only I had done this, if only I had done that, my child would still be here, my child would still be around. Maybe I didn't do enough of this, maybe I didn't do enough of that. The guilt is definitely part of the process a parent has to go through. Now, when a child dies, it is equivalent to a serious clinical depression that parents go through. The bereavement process is filled with such retching grief. It's such retching pain, loss, a sense that things are so wrong about what's occurring that is hard to describe and not something I would wish on anyone. I remember when I first became a parent, psychologist Katina Kostulis, whom actually has done an interview with me in another show and is archived here, talked about how once you become a parent, your very existence is vulnerable each and every day because whatever happens to that child happens to yourself. The power of empathic identification of a parent with a child is in part what drives a parent to take such good care of a child. Sometimes the parent might be a helicopter parent or a hovering parent. It doesn't matter. Sometimes the parent may be even hands-off. The hands-off parent still full of love and enjoyment of a child's progression through life will suddenly be rankled by the experience of not being able to see a child progressing through life. So deep grief, deep guilt, a sense of only if I had done this, that, or the other, a chronic sense that the child should walk in through the door, I'm missing out on all the years and years of future looking for all the anniversaries that the parent might be able to have anticipated. These are nightmares. These are the horrific nightmares and daymares that parents have to go through. And imagine a parent going out in an ordinary existence of life and with friends or neighbors or even in grocery stores seeing parents interface with other children and being reminded yet again, over and over again, multiple times in a second, in an hour, that their child is gone and they're not going to be ever experiencing what it is those other people are experiencing. I do have to say that it is my experience with individuals like this that they cannot stand the thought that anybody would take for granted time they could have with their children, and that anybody would be upset with a child and all those little nitty-gritty details because they would do anything to have those nitty-gritty annoying moments back with their child. Well, Pamela Yount, author of a book called Rhythmatic, had to face how she was going to recover from parenting a child that died of AIDS and what it meant to her to face her own inadequacies, her own lack of responsiveness to her child, meaning the guilt, and then how she was going to become wiser as a consequence and that is yet another stage that many parents have to find reason to move on, the meaning of life, to move on, what it's all about. When there are other children in the family, that still is the question. Other children need attention and need love and need to sense that they're important and meaningful enough for a parent to remain very full of life and active, but nonetheless, even to do that is quite difficult. So I have interviewed Pamela Yount at a conference that I went to in March, where I did radio interviews with many. And I'd like you to overhear the entire interview process with Pamela Yount, even the cheerful greeting, because I want you to experience her personality post the death of her child to AIDS. And then we will return for more discussion, more of your comments or call-ins, and some beautiful music by Courtney Walker that will inspire us to move on, even though we have these horrible things woven into our life. Here's my interview with Pamela Yount.
And ladies and gentlemen, someone else coming here. Her name is Pamela. Pamela, I do not know you, so this is going to be like so exciting to get to know you. And her last name is Yount. Y-O-U-N-T, if I said that right, Pamela.
Yes, you have.
All right. What a beautiful person it is, ladies and gentlemen. She has brought with her what's called wismatic. My theory about finding the wise old one in you. My goodness, the older I get, the older I get. I don't know if it's wise or... She's going to convince us that this is a good thing, folks. Pamela, first, tell us how people can get in touch with you so they know right off the bat what your contact is.
Okay, they can find me on Facebook.
I like that accent.
I'm from North Carolina.
Oh, nice.
They can find me at wismatic.com.
Wonderful.
And they can order
a phone number they can contact you with if they're in your area?
Yes, they can call me at 828-962-4336.
And what is your region? What's your city, your town?
Hickory, North Carolina.
North Carolina,
In
beautiful.
between Charlotte and Boone and Asheville. It's in that foothills area.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's one of the greenest, beautiful, humid, but gorgeous part of the planet here. So tell me about Wismatic, Pam, and Pam Yount. Am I saying that right? Pamela Yount. Tell me about Wismatic. What is this about?
Wismatic is a theory about finding the wise old one in you. I had a son to cross over with AIDS in 1994.
Bless your heart.
And through the experience, it changed my life. I started looking at things with a different perspective, started getting a deeper understanding about the mechanics of life and what makes us grow in our beings. What I seen was that I was being spun out of touch with reality into totality, into all the gifts of the Spirit, and was able to find a different part of me that I didn't know existed. So it changed my whole perception about how I looked at other people, how I judged other people,
how easy trap to fall into.
Yeah, how I labeled everything. And those things that I didn't want to look at in myself or I feared, I tried to distance myself from them by putting certain labels or anything I feared. I wanted to separate myself from, and it changed me to a compassionate person that loved people unconditionally and gave them, empowered them to be all they could be in their lives, to show up and be that person that they wanted to see coming out them, not to judge where they were coming from or why they were the way they were, just to give them the empowerment to show me who they were. You know?
Wow. So this is a very sad thing to have stimulated something so powerfully and loving in you. Recovery has got to be a chronic day-by-day process.
Well, the thing that I saw in all of this is that my son paid a big price to change our perception about what life was and how we looked at things and how we allowed our social concepts to come forth from others and make implants in our minds about how we looked at people and how we judged why things happen. It just changed me, and I felt like I was told many times that I needed to put this on paper because I would give people something to compare with their situations when they were going through these changes, and everybody has changes in their life. Death sometimes doesn't mean that somebody's dying. It means a death of a dream, a death of a goal, a death of a person that you love that just walks out of your life.
A significant loss. Significant loss that cannot be retrieved.
Right. But after I started changing, I started noticing the miracles that was taking place in my life.
Seriously? Can you give us an example?
Well, I have another son, and he had a massive heart attack. And he was at the right place at the right time. He was where he could get help. He had the right doctor was in the emergency room to see someone else, and was right there or he would have died. He died 40 times, and they brought him back to life. They hit him with a cardiac paddle 40 times. Yeah.
Gosh, that heart wanted to go.
And so the doctor that did the work on him, he worked so hard that sweat was running all the way down to his pants. And he didn't stop. He just did not stop. And so he told my son that he was a miracle man. No one had ever lived through anything like this. But I spoke that to my son that had crossed over, and I said, go find all the healers on this side and the other side. We're in big trouble. We need your help.
Wow.
So that doctor didn't stop. He did not stop. And he rode with him from one hospital to another in the ambulance, pumping his heart all the way. And later, I learned this doctor's name. His name was Dr. Looney. And I said, in the South we have this saying, only a loony would do that, But I was glad there was a loony.
Triumph.
Yeah, he was there that day to save my son. So that's just one of the miracles. And that my book talks about all these and the many challenges that I overcame to get where I am. And it's...
Everybody, this is called Wismatic, WISMATIC, and I'll have a picture of this up on the website so you'll be able to check into that as well when you're listening to the archive listen. And thank you, Pamela, so much for sharing the story. I know there's more to your story.
A lot more.
Yes, a lot more. So please do read the book. Contact her and give us once again your contact information, and then we'll...
It is Wismatic, www.wismatic.com, or you can call me at 828-962-4336. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pamela.
You're welcome.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is difficult. I'm sorry, the audio on that's a little bit difficult because we were sitting in the middle of a very active conference. It deals with all sorts of different life issues, and Pamela Yount allowed me to capture her so I could let you hear her story. Now, what is interesting about the way Pamela dealt with it is that she experienced that her child would reach out of the afterlife and assist with other people's lives, and that was her way of maintaining connection. And whether you believe in that or not, there are many stories exactly like that you can attain, you can read about online, you can see them on YouTube, about how parents really do experience their child afterward and maintain that sense of connection, either through psychics and psychic connections or through actual seeing ghostly apparitions of their child. And these stories are very common. In fact, if you have a friend who has gone through this experience, chances are they will not tell you about these moments, but they will have experienced them. And you will, that's a high probability of that. And if you have the sensitivity and the authenticity to ask them genuinely, if they have seen visitations from their child since death, you might have an extremely moving experiences in listening to their stories. But that aside, it's still full of grief. It is certainly easier for those parents who have had those type of visitations, whether you believe they're authentic or not, whether you believe in life after death or not. They have a sense of the parents saying, I know, they still exist. They're still present. They're still aware. They're still conscious. They're just not with me. Often that'll take the sting away to some degree, and they have a reason to move on. Pamela Yount moved on in her life, and that was one of the ways she did it, is that she found the connection with her son afterwards. She also found a way to be wiser and more productive and more functional. A friend of mine who had lost a child due to traumatic illness has taken those particular experiences to campaign for the well-being of other individuals that might possibly also be suffering. And that is one way to do it, is to become involved in how to press on. Pamela Yount, for example, could have joined the many parents who have had their children die to AIDS and be able to walk that cause confidently, that it would have a tremendous impact on other parents as well. Well, let's take a moment to listen to Courtney Walker. Courtney Walker is a country western singer. He has composed a beautiful tune called The Weaver, and it basically talks about how grief is woven into the fabric of our lives, and events we cannot control are woven into the fabric of our lives, and we have got to be ready to respond to the degree that we do not have control over every variable that walks into our life. And you know, I'm a big believer that we have a lot of control, and we need to take charge, and we need to make our lives happen the way we want and envision them to do. But there are those times when events happen that are horrible that we do not have active control over, because we are interfacing with a world where there are things outside of our control. And how do you deal with those things that are woven into our lives that are full of grief? And Courtney Walker has dealt with tremendous grief in his life, a loss of a very loved individual whom I knew as well, a beautiful, beautiful human being. I'll let him tell his story to you one day, hopefully soon. I want you to be inspired as he talks about how he copes, how he sings about how he copes, things woven into his life that were not wanted. And for him, he reaches out in faith and also realizes that when we go into the Christian faith, that Christ himself lost his life and his mother had to deal with that. So contemplate the severity, the broad nature of his title, Mournful Circumstances. Courtney Walker in The Weaver.
I the underside. and the shuttles cease to fly, shall God unroll the canvas and explain the reason why. The dark threads are as needful in the weaver's skillful hand as the threads of gold and silver in the pattern he has planned. Yes, my Lord is a weaver, and I a simple thread. He weaves me into his kingdom with the precious blood he shed. Yes, my Lord is a weaver, and I a simple thread. He weaves me into his kingdom with the precious blood he shed. He weaves me into his kingdom with the precious blood he shed.
Thank you, Courtney Walker, for sharing that with us. We're going to take the next little bit here to just help the parents, because you've gone through a lot. And if you've tuned into this particular show, then it means you've reached out for help, and thank goodness that you have, because there's no way to walk through all of this on your own. Oh, please, goodness, no. And many people do find a lot of comfort in their types of faith, and to be quite honest with you, that is a very common, and authentically the research is really clear that, yes, reaching out into faith tend to help people cope with horrible disasters more than any other intervention. So again, whether or not you believe in such things or not is not as relevant as those people who find themselves cursing and yelling and screaming at God, and at the very same time pleading for help to bear the burden. In addition to being able to join those groups of people, the grief and bereavement classes and groups that are available to you, don't hesitate. Don't feel like it's an act of pride. Don't feel like it is an act of weakness to be able to reach out to other people, but instead feel like it is an act of courage where you purposely say to yourself, you know what, I want assistance in coping with this. This is too big. It's huge. It's enormous to have lost a child. In addition to it being absolutely enormous and grief-stricken, something that you need from other people to help you with, I also know that there are people that just simply cannot understand God. And therefore, as a consequence, you don't reach out, because you don't want to have to live with listening to other people's say platitudes or fake resonance. People cannot understand what you're going through. And dealing with that sense of loneliness and complete isolation and what you're going through is, again, part of this process you need to break through in joining those people who have gone through it. And even then, if you go through those groups or those study groups or those online chats or whatever, where people have said they're going to go through it differently than you have. Your recovery time, the way you recover, the way you approach it, how you have to deal with the loss of your child is going to be your own particular journey and venture. That is not a pleasant one, and it is nonetheless your process. And the process that you go through is going to be your process. But here, let me give you vision for what might be your future and your goal. One, you will never lose your love of your child. Two, you will never forget who your child is and what your child has meant to you. Three, you will always remember those times where you wish that your child were there for Thanksgiving and Christmas and birthdays, Mother's Day, Father's Day. Having just gone through Father's Day before this show, you will remember that there were those times that you wish your child were there. In fact, every day you'll be reminded that your child's missing. If you have other people, loved one, your spouse, children, that are dependent on you also for emotional support. Do not forget that they need you there, and that the sharing of the grief, and not the isolation of you from your grief or you from their grief, is important. To be able to cry together, laugh together, cheer together, extremely important. But now what do you do with the guilt? Well, first, if you were responsible or you did something you could have done, see if you can do it for someone now that's still living. Learn from those experiences and become wiser, such as Pamela Yunt was talking about. Put your lesson into action and mobilize being able to be a better person now if you were somehow flawed for what happened. And if you were not really flawed, there was genuinely nothing you can do. So you have to live with the experience of forgiving yourself for being imperfect and not powerful enough to protect your child from everything. And your child is, after all, only there for us to participate in helping, but not necessarily to be able to control every variable in your child's life. Your child was, after all, born to their own independent existence, and you've played a major part in their opportunity to do so. Next, I really do think that individuals that go to well-known, well-substantiated psychics or spiritual guides, I really have over and over since parents get a tremendous amount of relief from having those sort of interfaces. And I don't know many psychologists that would actually recommend that because it would be taken as very odd. But since I have seen that be so curative to people being able to move on, I do suggest you do that as well. Now, in moving on in your own life, there's going to be those times you want to laugh, you want to go off and be productive and proactive and be successful and go on with what goes on in your existence as a human being. And the truth is your child would want that for you. A child that loves you and wants you to move forward, if that child is looking out of heaven itself and looking down at you and says, hey, Mom, Dad, move forward, move on, that's exactly, that's exactly what they would want for you. But what I do find is that parents often feel like they're not allowed to give themselves such a beautiful experience as moving on with life because they still need to maintain their grief. Because their grief is still a very big part of them. But as they move on, they realize it is a part of life. It's woven into your life, and your life still moves on. And as strange as it seems, there will be times when you want to laugh and love and succeed and progress and be focused on something so very different than your child. And that will be just fine. But it is something you have to adjust to in your own sense of things. So this is Dr. Carol Francis. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been working with parents in bereavement for 32 years. It's never easy. It's never easy. But it is a part of many parents' life. I hope it's not a part of every parent's life or all that goes on in your life. But for those of you who tuned in, we grieve with you. We are bereaved for you and with you as well. And we want to make sure that you know that we are there as you move on in your life without your child. The best of care, and until next time. This is Dr. Carol Francis from Torrance, California, signing off.